And so the next will be then our keynote speak by Alessandro. He's an associate professor at Politecnico di Milano, where he also did his PhD, and he's a very he's very deep into the topic of fault injection attacks. So he's going to talk about the fault attack friendliness of post-quantum schemes, if I recall the title correctly. Okay, so with this, I hand over the mic, and then the stage is yours.
So thanks for the kind introduction. It's for me a great pleasure to be here giving this keynote in the 20th edition of FDTC, which is, if nothing else, a testimonial to the fact that, yes, it's been a while that we have been doing active side channel attacks, and there's still something to tell, which is always nice as a scientist. Now, my point today will be talking about what I labeled as fault attack friendliness of post-quantum cryptographic primitives. Now, the context is this. You might have noticed, and depending on your involvement level, you might have been involved in the current rush towards replacing the traditional asymmetric crypto schemes with alternatives which are no longer based on factoring or D-logs on groups. Since this post-quantum cryptography wave started, we have now made more than one step. A couple of international organizations held contests for this, and one of the most, well, under the spotlight is the one by NIST. The US NIST has been running a contest since 2017. It received a warm reception by the community with roughly 80 submissions, 69 started the contest, and we are now drafting the standards. Well, I'm not with NIST, so I'm not drafting the standard, but NIST is currently drafting the standards. And drafts are available and up for comments for both a single asymmetric cryptography encryption scheme and two signatures. NIST also has an extra call for digital signatures, and many other national level standardization organizations are running similar contests or have. The Chinese Organization for Cryptography did already, and ETSI in Europe has a working group for this. The goal of my talk is have an overview of the fact that many of these schemes, the vast majority indeed, share common traits, are built using building blocks which are very similar, if not downright the same. And these building blocks share, in some points, fragility against fault attacks, which on one side, it's a pain, because it means that if you have a working fault attack against one of these traits, it works on a large amount of ciphers. And on the other side is a boon, harden one, and you have a good solution for more than one. Okay, so what is the NIST post-quantum cryptography contest? Well, it's the first public contest of this size, at least, to standardize an asymmetric encryption scheme and one or more, actually, asymmetric signature schemes. This was done in the same lane in which the AES contest ran back then in the early O's, and then the SHA-3 contest, which gave us also shake in the other years. And it really is the first case in which we try to standardize asymmetric encryption schemes, which have been designed and ran a contest with a bar to be cleared, which was the same thing for AES. The bar to be cleared was, please be immune to all known attacks. Back then it was linear differential cryptanalysis, impossible cryptanalysis, and all the sons and offsprings. For Shake, it was the same. Design a hash so that it's immune to current best attacks. My point here is that NIST sets high bars, and rightfully so, in starting the contest. And this time, the bar, which was set in 2017, was please design your crypto schemes so that they resist against active attackers. Now, for us in the fault attacks community, active attackers typically involves, well, at the very least, clock glitching, instruction skipping, or more aggressive techniques involving lasers or FIBs. In this case, active attackers is a bit far from our usual definition of active attacker, and it just says that for an encryption scheme, your attacker is allowed to decrypt other messages except the one he's interested in. He gets active in this sense. He has a decryption oracle. Similarly, for signatures, your active attacker is able to get something which signs messages, all the ones he likes, save for the one he wants actually to try and forge a signature for. So it's active, yes, but at the end, you're given a decryption box or signature box, and you can't still tamper with it. The nice thing was, okay, and if your side channel resistance is good, we will be glad as NIST. So they this time pointed this out explicitly. It was reasonable in 2017 to say this. Now my point is, these measures taken to resist active attackers in this sense at the end somehow help us against faults. And in helping that, they get a large, big red target painted on their back. Hitting these measures will typically allow regular active attackers at the end, to resume their attacks. Okay. So what did they ask for? As I said, public key encryption schemes and signatures. We'll go into public key encryption schemes first. The NIST call explicitly called for two things: public key encryption primitives in the proper sense, and KEMS, key encapsulation methods. What's the difference? Well, PKEs are expected to be encrypting anything of the proper length, of the length they can fit as a message. Think schoolbook RSA, for instance. What you encrypt is, well, a number, essentially. So whatever fits into the bit size for schoolbook RSA, that's the message. KEMS are, you may think, a specialization, so that is an encryption algorithm which is meant to encrypt just a symmetric key for the usual hybrid approach which we use: encrypt the symmetric key and then use it as a session key for the bulk with a symmetric one. So in this sense, the distinguishing trait is that in KEMS, you can expect the message to be short and perfectly randomly sampled. It's a key, it's just growing lots. Okay. KEMS in the NIST contest won an implicit, I call it popularity contest, because both KEM and PKCs were proposed. And after the first round of selection, only one public key encryption scheme survived, and it was merged with the KEM. I know it very well since I was in the team, and we took the decision of saying, well, KEM plus symmetric has now taken the lead in how we encrypt data, even for small messages, save for a number of very small cases. So, okay, well, let's fold the PKC into the KEM and call it a day, essentially. So what it ended up in being is a contest for key encapsulation methods. And the point is, how do you build a key encapsulation method? Well, from a public key encryption scheme. You start from something which encrypts a message and augment it so that it will encrypt just a random key. Why not going the reverse? Well, that approach is also possible, but this one of taking a PKE and growing around it has proven in practice the most popular. And at the end of the day, the current soon-to-be standard Kyber uses this approach. Starts from a PKE, adds components, gets a KEM. The main point in doing so is that in designing the PKE, you can focus on the underlying hard problem, and for a second, just that the encryption in the pen and paper sense doesn't get broken. And then, in a separation of concern approach, add something around which guarantees that the message is random and that nothing goes wrong in any sense. Okay. So I just need to provide you with, well, more than a bird level view on the hard problem. It's an ISS level view on the hard problems in post-quantum crypto because we're really looking at all of them from outer space, more than 10 kilometers. The idea is that most hard problems from which we build PKEs for post-quantum crypto can be very roughly phrased as you're given a public matrix, a random one, and the result of doing the matrix G pre-multiplied by a vector A and add another vector E, which is small by some metric you like, be it Hamming, Euclidean, or more refinite ones. It almost always works this way. You can encode your message as either A, the vector you choose, or E, the small vector you choose. Depending on what you do, you get different schemes, and depending on the metric, you also get different schemes. But the underlying point is the fact that if you don't have the private key, and I give you G the matrix and C the ciphertext, you have no way of getting A and E back, nor A nor E. Okay. This way of building things has one main issue, which was not the case in classical factoring and DLOG-based crypto, RSA and DLOG-based crypto. That is encryption failures. You do expect when you encrypt an RSA plaintext and then decrypt the ciphertext to get the same thing, even if the sun burns out. There's no way it's going to fail if you don't poke with the algorithm. These underlying problems instead have intrinsically decryption failures. You can have a legitimate plaintext being encrypted, try to decrypt it, and you're no longer able to get A and E out. Why? Well, colloquially, think of E as a small error, and you're adding it to something which is a vector in an ambient space, which is A times G. If the error is too large, when you try to remove it, you'll end up mismatching the original vector. You'll end up on something which is close, but not the one you encrypted. Essentially, it's as if you had an error correction code. Think as G as the matrix, as the generator matrix of the code. A times G is a code word. You add an error, and if the error is too large, you won't get your own code word back. This is precisely the point. You can design the crypto system so that it doesn't have failures. How? Well, just take the vectors very far apart or a small vector, and it will work. This is important because in all crypto systems having this structure, if you get a plaintext which fails decryption, it's revealing you something on the private key. Why? Because if the error is too large, you now know something about the correction capability of the private key. So you start tweaking with the error so that it's too large, slightly too small, slightly too large, and infer the private key. The definite technique changes from a scheme to another. It's specific of the problem, the metric, and everything else. But again, from an ISS, from International Space Station point of view, it's twiddle with the error, get on the edge of failure, above and after, infer the private key. Now, if you design a scheme without failures on paper, you're theoretically fully safe from this. It can't fail, no information leaked. The main point, and it is the leitmotif of essentially all, if not all, the vast majority of fault attacks against these schemes, is that faulting the processes, you can add errors, get twiddling again, and even if the designer designed something which doesn't fail, your introduced failures have the same effect as the original ones. And it's a key recovery attack. There are a couple of examples in literature already. These schemes received a lot of attention, and they always sound like, okay, twiddle with the error, get failures, set up a set of simultaneous equations, solve for the private key. I'm brutalizing a bit here. The solve for the private key may not be so straightforward, but essentially, that's the way. And we need to guard public key encryption schemes based on this from faults, which is challenging. Well, as I said, we build a PKE, so just something which encrypts stuff in a very weak attacker model, and then we raise our bar up to an active attacker, complementing the PKE with something else. The base point on which we build PKEs is what it's commonly called one-way under chosen plaintext attacks. It's a bit of a misnomer, if I have to say, because in this attacker model, the attacker doesn't choose anything. It just gets a public key, a message, and my good friend, please decrypt it. So it's not really chosen, but you know, we cope with this. It has been tried to be renamed in one-way passive. Should you wish, remember it this way. So you design a public key encryption scheme, which essentially doesn't break if the attacker gets the public key and a ciphertext. Going below that bar is hard. Then you augment it so that if the attacker is given a ciphertext, not only it cannot decrypt it, it really can't tell what was the message, even if he knew a set of potential ones. This is known as indistinguishability, and this time it makes sense, under chosen plaintext attack, because this time I give the attacker a public key and ask him, please give me two messages, two plaintexts. I'll toss a coin and encrypt one for you, and then challenge you to say which one I encrypted. So the attacker knows the messages, it just has to tell them apart. Think the case of networks where you know maintenance packet contents, so you know the messages, and you have to tell them apart. Bump up, this is still passive attacks. This is the bar that NIST asked to clear for the chems, and it's active attackers. The attacker gets the public key, gets to choose two messages, gets the encryption of one of two, and in whenever time he likes, he can ask a decryption oracle, think a seal device, to decrypt anything he wants, just not the ciphertext on which is challenged. So you can decrypt anything but the thing you don't know, and you shouldn't be able to break the scheme yet. This is a very aggressive attacker model. You can essentially decrypt all the messages but one and go by difference. If they were polynomial. They are not. But yes. What do? Well, we start designing this, and then with a set of, pardon me, Lego bricks, start building these. It's literally augmenting, moving from left to right, in a sense, with these ingredients. You start from your public key encryption scheme, which has a message input, a public key input, and if it's not deterministic, if it's randomized, some coins. Coins, to my surprise, tend to always come in dollars in all theoretical papers. So if you're wondering why $, it's because it's random coins being tossed. Okay, and the corresponding decryption. These are just one-way secure. You can't break them if they give you the public key and a ciphertext. Very basic. A hash, a cryptographically sound hash, a comparison element, which says yes or no if two things are equal or not, a selector, and then you may need constants around, either set something to X, or we'll need something which is a symbol for a failure. That is, okay, this process failed. It's a bit string which you deem as a label for I cannot. The typical notation is this bottom sign, but that's pretty much it. It's a symbol as any other. If you prefer to think this as fail, extended written, that's it. Okay. So what you do is take the public key encryption scheme and transform it into a secure chem. The ways to do this take the name of transforms. The by far most popular was by Fujisaki and Okamoto. It's known as the FO or Fujisaki-Okamoto transform, and it's been used in essentially all the current standardization candidates in various variants, but the skeleton is the same. A very nice work analyzed this transform as a modular transform, not just a single step from left to right in my previous slide, but add blocks and gather properties along the route. Essentially, you split this into two transforms. It's T and U. That's, I think, because T, it's okay, the T for transform, and U comes after T, so seems legit. Okay. So the first transform takes your public key encryption scheme, de-randomizes it, we'll see what this means, and adds a decryption check, which feels way more familiar. Essentially, we do this even usually, try to decrypt and see if it works. Take what you get out of this, box it into another larger box, which is the U transform, and gives you security up to against active attackers, because it will start by changing the public key encryption scheme into a CAM. So away with the message which has structure feed randomness, and deal with the failures somehow. Because as I said before, if you twiddle with the ciphertext before full text and feed it to a failing PKE, you get information. This construction is the stopgap against that information going out. Deal with the failure how? Well, there are two variants. I'll be looking at the most popular one. This is U bottom and U not bottom, because U bottom still leaves the possibility of saying, I'm sorry, I can't decrypt this without leaking information. U not bottom, you'll never say you cannot decrypt. How do you cope with this? Outputting random garbage, but not saying explicitly this was a failure. We'll see for these two guys, how do they look like, and what, as an implementation security guy, I can do to assess the full fragility of these schemes. So if I'm not just an active attacker, if I have equipment or lasers, where do they fail? And whether I can remove the properties they provide. Okay, this is the first one. The T transform is really simple. You get your PKE from before, and instead of feeding directly the message and the coins, you draw the coins from the hash of the message. De-randomization in this sense is it's because it's no longer true random coins, whatever this in this universe means. But it's algorithmically derived coins from the digest of a hash. This is an advantage. The entire thing, beginning to end, is now deterministic. There's no longer the effect of coins being drawn in change in the ciphertext. If you look at this, beginning to end, this can be rebuilt fully and checked on the receiver side, because it's fully deterministic. So one message goes in, one ciphertext comes out. And indeed, it's what the T transform does on the receiver side. The green box you see, it's the entire encryption procedure from the previous slide. No more, no less. I just rearranged the arrows to fit it. What does the T transform do in decryption? Well, you get your message, your ciphertext, and decrypt it with your secret key. Get what you hope, if there wasn't a failure, to be the plain text, and for the sake of it, re-encrypt it in full. Since the green box is deterministic, what I get out must be the same ciphertext. Otherwise something went terribly wrong with my message. So I can test and see if what I decrypt was indeed the thing used in encryption. This is very convenient. And from a fault resilience perspective, it goes back to how to check for errors in AES. Well, run one round forwards, one round backwards, and check if you got back to the previous state. Go on one forward, one back, and check. It's not something new, fully new for us in redundancy, and it just works. Okay, this gives you a deterministic public encryption scheme. As I said, no coins any longer. You do not need coins. You have a hash, and achieves a property which has been named rigidity, for the sake of it, which is literally two distinct ciphertext will never give you the same plaintext. Go back to the text, twiddle so that you add a little bit of error and see if it fails. Well, if it doesn't, it decrypts to the same message. You cannot any longer to different ciphertexts, good and tweedled. Well, only the good will decrypt. The tweedled won't, because there are no two ciphertexts going back to the same plane with the T-transform. This is effectively active if you try and hit the hard problem. This construction will stop you from getting information because it gets re-encrypted, doesn't match, and you get spotted. Indeed, this is pretty much the attack scheme you'll see in literature for attacks against non-rigid caps. Attack the problem, not the construction. But then again, working in fault attacks, there is a gigantic target painted on one component on this slide. And it's this one. This is just an if, it's a selector, which means target with an instruction skipping attack. And there goes the construction. Yeah, you're doing re-encryption, you're testing, and doing nothing. So yes, this construction, while on paper, actually doing its job, avoiding two ciphertexts being decrypted to the same message, one instruction skip, which is very cheap, and there it goes. On the plus side, hardening one if is cheap. So at the very least, we won't be spending too much. Okay. So either skip the selection, as I said, or the other obvious thing to do is flip the result of the comparison. If the comparison says equal different and equal is 0, different is 1, bit flip equal different to equal. So anything hitting the last portion will literally remove the guarantees. So the common attacker at the end will hit the cipher. So it's one fault and the old attack technique from pen and paper. Okay, T-transform done. We went from plain PKE to something which is deterministic and checks re-encrypting. Next step. This is the U-bar transform when you encrypt. Since we want a KEM, as you remember, our purpose is encrypt a session key, we'll just start with a message, which is a stack of coins being tossed. Start with your session key as the message. Do the same trick as the T construction, which is still here in the center. Just add another thing. Instead of outputting this as your session key, which would be the instinctive thing, you have 128 random bits, encrypt them, and use them as the session key. The U-transform says, well, take them and hash them before using them as the session key, before outputting them from your encryption. And optionally, if you want, you can also take into the ciphertext. Now, this provides an extra property which we won't be talking about today. It's just an extra hedge for some attacks, but you can gleefully ignore the green arrow should you want to for the moment. Okay, why this? Well, try and think what's the approach here if you do differential fault analysis. You may be willing to flip a single bit in the message and see how it goes. Well, if you do this and flip a single bit here, you won't be seeing the effects on the output because it gets hashed. And if the hash is halfway decent, you won't be able to tell what happened. You will just be able to tell that something happened, sure thing. But what? Well, not quite. On the other end, you do the same thing as before. This is the whole T construction from before in the pipeline. You still do the check, and if it doesn't match after re-encryption, output failure. And then, as I promised, the U construction says, I'll never say I failed. Okay, where's the trick? It's this last portion. In case you have a failure in the encryption, well, instead of outputting your message, which you decrypted, hashed as before, so session key hashed, you have another secret, which I labeled SK prime, which has to be stored in the private key of the cipher. And it's indeed just a random bit string, with the lone purpose that whenever you fail, you hash that instead of the message, plus the ciphertext. What you get in output is a thing which looks like a session key. It's bound to the ciphertext if you input it. So one ciphertext, one random garbage bit string going out deterministically. But it's not distinguishable if you're acting at the ends from a reasonable session key. It's 128 to 56 bits. Fully random, it's the output of a hash. And the attacker, not knowing this SK, which is in the private key, has no clue on distinguishing that. So it hides the failure inside. Okay, it hides the failure inside if you act at the ends. Now, this gives us the CAM using coins as a message, which is what we wanted, let's say, 10 slides before. And hashes, as I said, the plaintext to prevent straightforward differential fault analysis. The thing I said with U no bottom is known as implicit rejection of the ciphertext, because I'm not saying, no, I can't decrypt this. I'm just saying, I did it. Here's your session key. The 2 points in which this thing is fault fragile, in the sense that if we do fault attacks, we go back to not having the construction equivalent, are, well, the one you would expect. Hey, there's a check. There's another check. Hit it, and the thing will go down. This was indeed one of the first cases of fault attacks against post-quantum primitives. It's from 2018. Remember that the contest started 1 year before. It was really one of the first ones. And it's the obvious point, because if this concoction is meant to say, if you failed, hide the failure, well, if you flip the result of if you failed, you won't hide the failure. That's pretty straightforward. And again, it's another large target on this other selector. The kind of a less evident point in implicit rejection in this mechanism is that it's not just the selector and the comparison, if you will. It's the entire process computing the garbage value, the hash of small secret in the private key plus ciphertext. Why? Because that thing is deterministic. If you look at it, this is a constant. And if I'm using the same ciphertext, this process is deterministic. What does it happen if I run one decryption, one full thing, and do nothing, get a session key, rerun, and fault this part alone? If I do see the garbage changing, it's actually garbage. If the decryption succeeded, I won't be going through this branch. I'll be going through this branch. So my fault is a safe fault. Nothing changes. And I still distinguish whether they gave me garbage because it changed, I changed the garbage, or not, even if this check is perfectly legit. So this time the attack surface is not just, as one would expect, the if and the comparison. It's this entire portion, which by mischance also includes a secret value, which is from the private key. So all of a sudden, your attack surface bumped to far more. And note that I didn't say which fault should occur here. It's just anything. It's RSA CRT like. Flip a bit, botch something, do something. It's a hash. It will make it evident. Cough in the nearby room for the sake of it. Okay. So in this sense, the U construction gives you very strong guarantees. After this, if nothing goes wrong with faults, the cipher resists active attackers on paper, but it's fault fragile in two different ways. Very different ways. Okay. And then one extra thing, which is the last way of adding stuff to a PKE to get to a CAM. Before this Fujitake Okamoto construction went famous, there was an alternative to get to an CCA, so to an active attacker resistant CAM. It's known as plaintext confirmation. And it's really this simple. You start from the usual plain encryption. Okay, go with the plaintext you like, typically coins. De-randomize, and add one extra thing to your output. You usually have the session key and the ciphertext. As you can see, I'm adding another hash, and this thing is done with a different hash algorithm in the original paper, or as practitioners with domain separation. So this is still SHA-3, your message. SHA-3, your message with a different fixed prefix, you're glad. The key point is that if I get these two hashes, they should be from unrelated hashing algorithms. They shouldn't tell anything one about the other. Why add another hash? I have this perfectly fine one. The session key is already a hash. What's the purpose of this? This is known as a confirmation hash, and it has one job. Instead of being kept on the sender as the session key is, because this is the encryption, I'll be encrypting and keeping the session key. This thing is sent on the wire with the ciphertext. So it's encrypted message and confirmation hash. Onto the receiver. I do now get the ciphertext. Yeah, sure thing. I have a private key, and I have the confirmation hash. Well, I decrypt, and I do two things. Derive my session key, in the meanwhile, hashing it, and take what I got, and I hope is the message, hash it with the second hash, and match it with this, now reasonably called, confirmation hash. This is a SHA-checksum of the session key with another hash, called confirmation because it confirms to you that the message you decrypted is actually what it intended to be. Now, if hash prime is secure and unrelated to hash, this doesn't leak information because this samples another string at random and gives the receiver a way of doing a hash checksum, brutally speaking, on the session key. This is a very simple idea, per se. It's nothing too fancy. And it was introduced, indeed, in 2002 by Alexander Dent in A Designer's Guide to Chem, which is a very nice Google-friendly title. Dent's idea prevents modifications to the ciphertext because change the ciphertext, decrypts to a different session key. Even if it's valid, well, you have a checksum of the good one. It won't go through. Change anything in the ciphertext, which will give you a correct decryption or a failure, whatever, there's a checksum of the good procedure. You won't get through. There's no way you'll get through. And indeed, this procedure was also used and is used in some of the candidates for standardization. Essentially, Bike does, which is one of the three fourth round candidates now. And there's also a variant in which you can guarantee not only here's a checksum of the session key, but the session key was sampled from the output of a hash. It's a trickstery that the team from LIDA, which was another contestant, introduced and is now adopted by Bike. So it can be extended not only for here's the session key, and it's the output of a hash. So the attacker cannot just provide to the decryption oracle messages which have a poisonous session key, a chosen session key, because it gets hashed, and unless the attacker knows how to do pre-images, it cannot drive the output of a hash. Is this fault fragile? Well, in the obvious point, yeah. Hit this, and as usual, you're toast. But it's just hit the selector on whether the checksum matches or not. Try and drive the process of hashing a message to get the output you want via faults is challenging because it's not a pre-image on the hash, but it's the closest thing you get hitting it with faults. So we push back the attack surface of a construction which does the thing the U does to this alone. This is why if you need to choose between plaintext confirmation and the other U construction, you might be willing to take a deeper look at this. You need just to protect the if and the comparison. While before you had a whole, well, permanent storage, first of all, the SK, and the hash to protect. Okay. Before moving on this, has this been used? Yes. The attack I mentioned before hits the implicit rejection part is a very recent paper, 2023, which is a permanent fault attack on entry. Entry does this as a choice, the old one. The idea by Dan Bernstein was, okay, run a couple of entry decryptions, and then fault SK permanently. Run another bunch, and you get in. It's interesting because this branch involves both transient fault, which can happen in computation, and permanent faults to the private key storage. So it's a lot of extra attack surface for us, if you're on the attacker side, mind you, or a lot of extra stuff to protect. Okay. Moving on to the other half of the heaven, signatures. A very popular way of building signatures, post-quantum ones, is what is now called turning an interactive scheme into a non-interactive one. What does it mean? Well, there are interactive identification schemes in which a prover talks to a verifier, and the verifier gets convinced that the prover is who he claims to be. Now, that is interactive, so it's fine if you're standing at the door with a guard, but signatures should be checkable after the fact. It's something you write on paper and anyone checks without you being present. A very clever idea in 1986, I mean, it was a kid, was from Amos Piat and Ali Shamir, and it's a way of turning an active identification scheme, an interactive identification scheme, into a signature. This is the way most signatures are now done, because designing a secure identification scheme is very, relatively speaking, easier, so to say. And then it's just apply this and you get a signature. It has downsides. The signatures are not extremely small. But dilithium, one of the two selected for standardization, employs a variant of this framework, essentially. It's not just Fiat-Shamir, it's Fiat-Shamir with Awards, but it's still that one. What's the idea of an identification scheme? Well, I'm convincing you that it's me because I know the solution to a hard problem, to a computationally hard problem, and I'm the only guy. How do I convince you? Well, my key pair is an instance of the problem, which is public, and the private key, which is the solution. To convince you, I sample another instance of the same hard problem and build the solution, because this is not sampled just out of a hat. It's somehow related to the one I know to solve. So my private key will allow me to solve also P prime. And then I'm in a bit of an issue, because I either tell you the solution to P prime, but you may infer something on my private key if I also tell you how I built P prime, or I tell you that I built P prime fairly from what I know how to solve, but I don't tell you the solution. If I tell you both, you'll most likely, or we have no construction for, derive the private key. The idea of an interactive ID scheme is that you tell only one thing out of the two, either the solution or how you built it. And then ladder means repeat 100 times. You let the verifier choose what you reveal. So the verifier tosses a coin, and after doing this 100 times and asking you the solution, no, how you built it, solution, how you built it, and you can't tell, well, it will be convinced that you know both, essentially. Crucial point, the verifier should be tossing a coin to choose whether to ask for the problem construction or the solution, because if you can predict it, you cheat. Either build a problem unrelated to the private key and pass, and you can solve it, or build fairly a problem which you cannot solve and present, hey, I built it fairly. Okay. This is a bit abstract. This is a simple scheme, which is now in the 4th call by NIST. And I'll be going through this at a very quick glance. The idea is that the hard problem is always the same. Your secret key is a small vector. Your public key is a matrix, and the product of the vector times that matrix. For the coding theory guys, it's a parity check matrix. The secret is an error, and the other part of the public key is a sin. With a good error correction code, retrieving the error is trivial with an efficient error correction code. If you have a random code, there's no way to do this, because for a randomly sampled code, this is incomplete. I can build another instances of the same problem. So that is, I have another syndrome, and I tell you, I know the error. Do trust me, please. How do I do this? Without entering into details, what I do is sample another error and a vector to mask partially what I'm doing, and literally derive another S tilde equals UH, another instance of the problem. And now, before you ask me, I want the solution, I want the problem, I have to commit on the fact that I won't backtrack and change what I'm offering you. How do I commit cryptographically? Hash what led me to build a new problem, hash the solution. These are two sealed envelopes I'm handing you, and are my commitments on I can solve either the first one or the second. You choose. This can be the end of it, and it's 3 steps protocols. Skip here where you toss a coin and get one of the answers. Or some other protocols have extra coins being sampled, as in this case, depending on the problem essentially. Fast forward to here. The verifier says, toss a coin, open envelope 1, please. Reveal me the content of envelope 1. Okay, if you say envelope 1, I'll send you the content of this envelope, and you can test it's good, because this is the randomly sampled problem. I'll provide you a way to see that it's randomly sampled, and you'll be glad. Essentially, you take this, you hash it, and it has to match the digest. If you open the solution envelope, I provide you the means to see that it's an actual solution. It's not straightforward here, but for this, believe me, it's fast. Good. But this is interactive. I mean, I'm passing around messages between me and the verifier. How do I get non-interactive? Okay, let's clear the picture. What goes on is I prepare sealed envelopes, get a challenge, computer response, get a challenge, computer response depending on the challenge. And then it goes accept or reject from the verifier. Well, what if instead of getting challenges, I take whatever I did, hash it again, and take the first bits of the hash as the coins. Well, if I cannot drive the output of the hash, which if it's pre-image resistant, I cannot, those are good coins. And I can do it for all the challenges I had. But now I'm not interacting with the verifier. I'm just hashing stuff on my own in my head. So the entire first part goes through. without interaction. Okay, bag the entire commitments and responses and call this a signature. You need to sign a message. Okay, in the hashes, put also the message. The verifier will just, well, it has the inputs, it can rebuild the coins and recheck the log. It's a transcript of an interaction, which is now no longer interactive. And it's pretty much the way we're building stuff because it's so nice. You have a hard problem, which maybe not trapdoored for the sake of it, and you run this thing. And then it's practitioners. What can go wrong here? Well, first of all, faults in the control flow. As I said, the verifier tosses a coin and gets one envelope open. If it could get both of them, it gets the private key. This is true for all the schemes. What if the verifier, while I'm signing, rewinds the clock and goes through the same coin toss twice? I may be opening two different envelopes for the same round, and literally in the signature, which is not valid, I'm revealing the private key. So yeah, sure thing, the signature is botched. The fault attacker doesn't get a valid signature, but in the signature, it has information to reveal the private key. So attacks like the one on AES, which stopped the round counter or injected a fault in the round counter having one extra or one less round and did VFA, are seeing a renaissance here because you redo the same thing, open two different envelopes, and get one shot, one kill, the private key. So even if it doesn't look like it's vulnerable, the repeat the protocol counter, if you repeat it, it's a very soft spot. And so is the randomness you use as coins to open the bags. If you open two envelopes, it's gone. The other thing is, and this has a practical attack on the table already. I won't be spoiling things from this and the chess conference, but yeah, it's in the next days. When I open the envelope, which solves a problem which is related to mine, if I fault the problem solution creation, I may leak information. Usually it's done so that there's zero information leakage for the scheme. What you can do is alter how that problem is built so that it leaks information on the key. It's highly scheme specific. So the thing, more than a general warning on the construction, it's a warning on look in that spot because you may be leaking information. Okay, drawing conclusions. In this, a bit of a drinking from a fire hose approach to an overview, what I want you to take home is construction which provide resistance against active attackers for public key encryption scheme in post-quantum cryptography, also hedge against faults if they are not the fault target. If you harden them against faults, they will provide protection for the entire scheme, even if the fault attacks take place before, because altering ciphertext or altering part of the procedure, if I have a check, will not go unnoticed. So harden them, and they do not cost too much, and you may be living a happier life for the rest. For signatures, as I said, control flow checks are going to be back, and care in looking at how the secret containing envelope is prepared. One question which I just leave open is, can we somehow design constructions which are not just robust against active attackers in the pen and paper sense, but provide robustness against fault attacks intrinsically? Plaintext confirmation makes us think that it's not impossible. It actually reduces the attack surface from implicit rejection, but the road ahead is long, which is good for us, essentially. And with this, I thank you for the attention, and I'll be glad to take any questions here or offline.